Imagine waking up every morning knowing that your life does not belong to you. Before the sun rises, you are already expected to be at work. Your hands, your labor, your time, and even your future are controlled by someone else. You cannot decide where to live, whom to marry, where to travel, or what dreams to pursue. Every choice that most people consider a basic human right is placed in the hands of another person. This was the reality for millions of enslaved people living in the American South during the 18th and 19th centuries. To understand the events that unfolded in Virginia in 1831, it is important to first understand the world in which enslaved people lived. Slavery was not simply a system of labor. It was a system designed to strip human beings of their freedom, dignity, and independence. Enslaved men, women, and children were treated as property under the law. They could be bought, sold, traded, inherited, and used to generate wealth for their owners. On plantations across the South, life revolved around exhausting labor. Many enslaved people worked in cotton, tobacco, rice, and sugar fields. The work was physically demanding and often lasted from sunrise until sunset. During the hottest days of summer, workers toiled under intense heat. During the colder months, labor continued despite harsh weather conditions. There were few opportunities for rest, and failure to meet expectations could result in punishment. For enslaved children, hardship often began at a very young age. Many started performing tasks long before reaching adulthood. Childhood, as we understand it today, was often replaced by labor and responsibility. Young boys and girls watched their parents work under constant supervision, learning early that their lives were controlled by forces beyond their influence. One of the cruelest aspects of slavery was the destruction of families. Enslaved people lived with the constant fear that loved ones could be sold away at any moment. A husband might be separated from his wife. A mother could lose her child. Brothers and sisters could be sent to different plantations, never seeing each other again. These separations were not rare events. They were common features of the slave system. Imagine the emotional pain of not knowing whether you will see your family tomorrow. Imagine hearing that a loved one has been sold hundreds of miles away with no chance of reunion. Such experiences created deep wounds that lasted lifetimes. Yet, despite these hardships, enslaved families fought to preserve their bonds, traditions, and sense of identity. Education was another area where freedom was severely restricted. In many southern states, enslaved people were forbidden from learning to read and write. Slaveholders feared that education could inspire resistance or help individuals escape. Knowledge was viewed as dangerous because it encouraged independent thought. Despite these restrictions, many enslaved people secretly pursued education. Some learned from sympathetic individuals. Others taught themselves using scraps of books and hidden lessons. The desire for knowledge became an act of courage. Every word learned represented a small victory against a system designed to keep people powerless. Religion played a powerful role in the lives of many enslaved communities. Churches and gatherings often provided emotional support and hope during difficult times. Biblical stories of deliverance and freedom resonated deeply with people living in bondage. The story of Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt, for example, held special significance because it reflected the longing for liberation. At the same time, slaveholders often attempted to use religion as a tool of control. They emphasized obedience while ignoring messages about justice and equality. Enslaved people, however, frequently developed their own interpretations of faith, finding strength and inspiration in scriptures that spoke of freedom and human dignity. Violence was an ever-present reality within the slave system. Punishments could be severe and public. Whippings, beatings, and other forms of physical abuse were used to enforce obedience. The threat of violence hung over daily life, creating an atmosphere of fear and intimidation. Yet the brutality of slavery extended beyond physical punishment. Psychological control was equally important. Enslaved people were constantly reminded of their lack of legal rights. They could not testify against many white individuals in court. They had little protection from abuse. Their futures depended largely on the decisions of others. Despite these conditions, enslaved communities demonstrated remarkable resilience. They created families, preserved cultural traditions, shared stories, and supported one another. Music became a source of comfort and expression. Spiritual songs carried messages of hope, faith, and endurance. Communities developed ways to maintain their humanity even in circumstances designed to deny it. Resistance took many forms. Some enslaved people slowed their work. Others sabotaged equipment. Some escaped and sought freedom in northern states or Canada. Many simply resisted by preserving their identity and refusing to surrender their sense of self-worth. These acts of resistance remind us that slavery was never accepted willingly by those forced to endure it. The desire for freedom remained alive despite every effort to suppress it. Every escape attempt, every secret lesson, every hidden prayer represented a rejection of the system. The American South depended heavily on slavery for economic success. Wealthy plantation owners accumulated enormous fortunes through the labor of enslaved workers. Cotton, often called King Cotton, became one of the most valuable commodities in the world. Yet behind this wealth stood countless individuals whose labor generated profits they would never share. This contradiction lay at the heart of the slave system. The prosperity enjoyed by some depended on the suffering of others. Large plantation houses, elegant lifestyles, and expanding businesses were often built upon the unpaid labor of enslaved men, women, and children. As years passed, tensions continued to grow. Enslaved people sought freedom, while slaveholders sought greater control. Fear existed on both sides. Those living in bondage feared punishment, separation, and oppression. Slaveholders feared resistance, rebellion, and the collapse of the system upon which their wealth depended. Understanding this reality is essential because it explains why events like the Virginia uprising of 1831 occurred. Such rebellions did not emerge from nowhere. They developed within a world defined by inequality, exploitation, and denied freedom. The harsh conditions of slavery created anger, frustration, and desperation that could not always be contained. The story of slavery in the American South is ultimately a story about human endurance. It reveals the extraordinary strength of people who survived under conditions that would have broken many others. It shows how individuals preserved hope even when freedom seemed impossible. And it reminds us that the desire for liberty is one of the most powerful forces in human history. When we study this period, we are not simply examining dates and events. We are confronting the lived experiences of millions of people whose voices were often ignored. Their struggles, sacrifices, and determination shaped the course of American history and continue to offer important lessons about justice, human rights, and the enduring value of freedom. Throughout history, some individuals have lived ordinary lives on the surface while carrying extraordinary burdens within them. Their outward appearance reveals little about the struggles taking place in their minds and hearts. Such was the case for many enslaved people in the American South. Forced to live under a system that denied their humanity, they often carried emotions that could not be openly expressed. Fear, hope, anger, faith, and determination existed side by side, shaping their daily experiences in ways that outsiders rarely understood. To understand how one enslaved preacher eventually became the leader of one of the most famous slave rebellions in American history, we must first explore the powerful forces that shaped his thinking. His journey was not created overnight. It was formed through years of oppression, spiritual reflection, and a growing belief that the world around him was profoundly unjust. From an early age, he demonstrated unusual intelligence. Those who knew him noticed that he learned quickly and possessed a remarkable memory. While many enslaved people were denied educational opportunities, he managed to gain knowledge that set him apart. He developed a deep interest in reading and spent significant time studying religious texts. In the world of slavery, education could be transformative. Knowledge allowed people to see beyond their immediate circumstances. It encouraged questions about justice, morality, and human rights. For someone living in bondage, these questions could become deeply personal. As he matured, religion became central to his identity. He immersed himself in Scripture and spent countless hours contemplating its meaning. The Bible was not simply a book to him. It became a lens through which he interpreted the world around him. Many enslaved people found comfort in religion because it offered hope during difficult times. Stories of deliverance, redemption, and divine justice resonated strongly with individuals who experienced suffering every day. The belief that God cared about the oppressed provided emotional strength and spiritual comfort. For this preacher, however, faith became something even more powerful. He began to see spiritual significance in events that others might overlook. Natural phenomena such as eclipses, unusual weather patterns, and atmospheric conditions appeared meaningful to him. He interpreted these occurrences as signs carrying divine messages. Today, people may view such interpretations differently, depending on their personal beliefs. Some historians see these experiences as evidence of intense religious conviction. Others view them through psychological or cultural perspectives. Regardless of interpretation, there is little doubt that these beliefs profoundly influenced his actions. Faith gave him a framework for understanding suffering. Imagine living in a society where every law reinforces your oppression. Imagine watching families torn apart, witnessing injustice daily, and knowing that your future remains controlled by others. Under such circumstances, many people search for explanations. Religion provided answers that the surrounding society could not. The slave system claimed that bondage was natural and permanent. Scripture, however, offered stories in which the oppressed were eventually delivered. These stories created a powerful contrast between the world as it existed and the world as believers hoped it could become. As his faith deepened, so did his awareness of injustice. He observed the contradictions around him. People who considered themselves religious often participated in a system that deprived others of freedom. Sermons preached morality, while human beings were bought and sold in markets. Claims of Christian virtue coexisted with practices of violence and exploitation. Such contradictions raised difficult questions. How could a society claim moral authority while maintaining slavery? How could individuals speak of justice while denying freedom to others? These questions likely intensified his internal struggle. Yet oppression alone does not explain his transformation. Many people suffered under slavery without leading rebellions. What made his story unique was the way faith and oppression combined to shape his worldview. Rather than viewing himself merely as a victim of circumstance, he increasingly believed he had a purpose. This belief was extraordinarily significant. Throughout history, individuals who see themselves as part of a larger mission often display remarkable determination. When people believe they are acting on behalf of a cause greater than themselves, fear can lose much of its power. For enslaved people, fear was a constant companion. Punishment could be severe. Resistance carried enormous risks. Anyone suspected of organizing rebellion faced imprisonment, torture, or execution. These realities discouraged open opposition. Yet faith sometimes provided courage where fear might otherwise prevail. The preacher's growing conviction appears to have convinced him that action was necessary. He came to believe that enduring injustice indefinitely was unacceptable. More importantly, he believed that he had been chosen to play a role in confronting it. This belief transformed his understanding of himself. He was no longer simply an enslaved laborer living under oppression. In his mind, he became an instrument of a higher purpose. Whether one agrees with his conclusions or not, it is important to understand the psychological power of such conviction. History is filled with individuals whose actions were shaped by deeply held beliefs. Religious movements, political revolutions, and social reforms have often been driven by people who believed they were fulfilling a mission. In his case, that mission pointed toward resistance. As time passed, he began discussing ideas with trusted companions. These conversations were conducted in secrecy because discovery would have had devastating consequences. Trust was essential. A single informant could destroy everything. The risks were enormous. Every meeting carried danger. Every conversation could lead to exposure. Yet the discussions continued. What motivated such persistence? Part of the answer lies in the accumulated weight of oppression. Years of witnessing injustice can create a sense that change is necessary regardless of the cost. For individuals living under slavery, the status quo offered little hope. Another part of the answer lies in faith. His religious beliefs convinced him that history was moving toward a moment of reckoning. He interpreted events through a spiritual framework that emphasized divine justice. This perspective strengthened his resolve and reduced the influence of fear. Fear itself is a fascinating element of this story. Most people naturally avoid actions that threaten their safety. Fear protects us from danger. It encourages caution and self-preservation. Yet fear can also be overcome. When individuals become convinced that a cause is more important than personal survival, they may choose paths that others consider unimaginable. The preacher's life demonstrates this phenomenon clearly. He understood the consequences of failure. He knew that rebellion could lead to death. He knew that authorities possessed overwhelming power. He knew that success was uncertain. Nevertheless, he moved forward. This decision reveals the extraordinary influence of conviction. His story also highlights the complex relationship between faith and action. Religion can inspire compassion, forgiveness, and peace. It can also motivate individuals to challenge systems they perceive as unjust. Throughout history, faith has played a role in both preserving social orders and transforming them. For this preacher, faith became a catalyst for change. His interpretation of Scripture convinced him that passive acceptance was no longer possible. He saw resistance not merely as a political act, but as a moral and spiritual obligation. Whether viewed as a revolutionary, a religious visionary, or a tragic figure shaped by his circumstances, his journey cannot be understood without recognizing the forces that influenced him. Oppression created the conditions. Faith provided meaning. Together, they formed a powerful combination. The years leading to the rebellion were therefore not simply a period of planning. They were a period of transformation. A man who had once lived quietly within the boundaries imposed by slavery gradually came to see himself as part of a larger struggle. His beliefs gave him purpose. His experiences gave him motivation. And the world around him provided constant reminders of why change seemed necessary. By the time the uprising began, the transformation was complete. The quiet preacher had become a man driven by conviction, shaped by suffering, and sustained by faith. The forces of oppression that sought to control him had instead helped create one of the most significant and controversial figures in the history of American slavery. Understanding that transformation helps us understand not only the rebellion itself, but also the deeper human realities that produced it. It reminds us that history is often shaped by the interaction of personal belief and social circumstance, and that the most dramatic events frequently begin within the minds and hearts of individuals long before they appear in the public eye. By the summer of 1831, years of secret conversations, spiritual conviction, and growing frustration had reached a critical point. What had begun as private discussions among a small group of trusted individuals was about to become one of the most significant uprisings in the history of American slavery. The rebellion did not emerge suddenly. It was the result of careful planning, immense risk, and a determination that had been building for a long time beneath the surface of plantation life. For those involved, secrecy was essential. Living under slavery meant that even the slightest suspicion of rebellion could result in severe punishment or death. Plantation owners constantly feared organized resistance and relied on surveillance, informants, and harsh discipline to maintain control. Because of this, any effort to organize an uprising required extraordinary caution. The man at the center of the movement understood these dangers. He knew that a single mistake could expose the entire plan. Every conversation had to be carefully managed. Every participant had to be chosen with great care. Trust became one of the most valuable resources available to the conspirators. The group remained relatively small in the beginning. Only individuals believed to be loyal and committed were informed of the plans. This approach reduced the chances of betrayal. The participants shared not only a desire for freedom, but also an awareness of the enormous risks involved. Planning a rebellion under such conditions was incredibly difficult. Enslaved people had limited access to weapons, transportation, and communication networks. They lived under constant supervision. Gathering information or coordinating actions required creativity and patience. Despite these obstacles, preparations continued. The leader believed that the time for action was approaching. According to historical accounts, he interpreted various natural events as signs confirming that the moment had arrived. These beliefs strengthened his confidence and reinforced his sense of purpose. What might have appeared impossible to others seemed achievable through the lens of his faith. As discussions progressed, practical considerations became increasingly important. The conspirators needed a strategy that could maximize their chances of success. They understood that they were greatly outnumbered and lacked the resources available to the authorities. One of the key elements of the plan involved surprise. If the uprising began unexpectedly, local plantation owners would have little time to organize a response. Confusion could provide valuable opportunities. The rebels hoped that rapid action would allow them to gather supporters and gain momentum before authorities fully understood what was happening. The timing of the attack was carefully considered. Night offered advantages. Darkness reduced visibility and made movement easier. Many plantation owners would be asleep and unprepared. The rebels could move between locations with a lower risk of immediate detection. As the chosen date approached, tension increased. Those involved knew that they were standing at the edge of a life-changing event. Success could potentially lead to freedom. Failure would almost certainly result in death. Every participant faced a profound personal decision. Should they continue? Should they risk everything? For many, the answer was yes. The realities of slavery made the possibility of freedom worth extraordinary sacrifices. Remaining in bondage offered little hope for meaningful change. The future promised more labor, more restrictions, and continued separation from basic human rights. Against that backdrop, the risks of rebellion became easier to accept. Finally, the moment arrived. In the early hours of August 1831, the uprising began. The first actions were swift and deliberate. Moving from plantation to plantation, the rebels sought to expand their numbers while maintaining momentum. Surprise worked in their favor during the initial stages. Many victims had little warning before the attacks occurred. As news spread through the countryside, confusion quickly turned into fear. Plantation owners struggled to understand what was happening. Rumors moved faster than reliable information. Some people believed the rebellion was much larger than it actually was. Others feared that similar uprisings were beginning throughout Virginia. Meanwhile, the rebels continued moving through Southampton County. Additional participants joined the movement as it advanced. Some were motivated by the hope of freedom. Others were driven by anger over years of oppression. Each new recruit increased the size of the group and reinforced the sense that a significant challenge to the slave system was underway. The uprising was unlike anything many local residents had ever experienced. For decades, enslaved people had been viewed by slaveholders as a controlled labor force. The rebellion shattered that assumption. Suddenly, the people whom plantation owners believed they dominated were actively resisting. This realization intensified panic. Families fled their homes. Messengers raced across roads carrying warnings. Armed citizens began organizing defensive measures. Local authorities attempted to gather information while preparing a response. The atmosphere became chaotic. Every report seemed to bring new fears. Some stories exaggerated the scale of the uprising. Others contained conflicting details. In times of crisis, uncertainty often fuels anxiety, and that was certainly true in Southampton County. Despite the confusion, one fact became increasingly clear. The rebellion was real, and it posed a serious challenge to local authority. As hours passed, organized resistance against the rebels began to form. Militias, volunteers, and armed groups mobilized. Horsemen traveled across the region. Communication networks that had previously been slow suddenly became more active as communities worked together to confront the threat. The rebels faced a difficult reality. Although they had achieved initial success through surprise, maintaining momentum would be far more challenging. Their opponents possessed greater numbers, better weapons, and access to additional resources. The balance of power began shifting. As armed forces concentrated in the area, opportunities for the rebels narrowed. Movement became more dangerous. Encounters with organized opposition increased. The possibility of sustaining the uprising diminished with each passing hour. Nevertheless, the rebellion had already achieved something significant. It had exposed vulnerabilities within the slave system. For a brief period, enslaved individuals had seized the initiative. They had demonstrated that resistance was possible. They had challenged assumptions that many slaveholders considered unquestionable. The uprising continued for approximately 48 hours before being suppressed. During that time, around 55 people were killed. The violence shocked observers throughout the nation. Newspapers reported the events with dramatic language. Political leaders discussed the implications. Communities far beyond Virginia followed developments with intense interest. The rebellion's immediate military outcome was clear. The authorities eventually regained control. The participants were pursued, captured, or dispersed, yet the broader consequences extended far beyond the battlefield. For white Southerners, the uprising created profound fear. Many had assumed that slavery provided stability and security. The rebellion challenged that belief. If such an event could occur in Southampton County, where else might it happen? This question haunted the South. Plantation owners began re-evaluating their assumptions about control. Legislators considered new restrictions. Communities increased surveillance of enslaved populations. Fear influenced policy decisions for years afterward. For enslaved people, the rebellion carried different meanings. Some viewed it as a courageous act of resistance. Others may have feared the harsh retaliation that often followed such uprisings. Reactions varied depending on individual experiences and circumstances. What cannot be denied is the extraordinary courage required to participate. Every person involved understood the risks. They faced overwhelming odds. They challenged one of the most powerful systems in American society. Whether historians interpret their actions as heroic, tragic, or a combination of both, the participants displayed a willingness to sacrifice everything for a cause they believed in. The planning and execution of the rebellion remain among the most studied aspects of American history because they reveal the complex realities of life under slavery. They demonstrate how oppression can generate resistance, how belief can inspire action, and how even the most powerful institutions can face challenges from those they seek to control. For 48 hours, the normal order of life in Southampton County was shattered. The carefully maintained appearance of stability disappeared. Fear replaced confidence. Uncertainty replaced certainty. And a rebellion that began in secrecy transformed into an event that would leave a permanent mark on the history of the United States. Long after the uprising ended, people continued debating its meaning. Yet one fact remained undeniable. The events of those 2 days changed the course of American history. and ensured that the struggle between slavery and freedom could never again be ignored.